Welcome everybody. I see a lot of people are logging in right now. We're gonna wait for everyone to get here, but before we get started, make sure that you have your supplies for today's workshop. We also have some artworks for you to look at and enjoy. And we have some questions in the top right corner. Feel free to write in the chat or the Q&A if you want to answer any of the questions in the top, and we'll be happy to share your responses and thoughts as well as try to answer some of your questions. In the bottom left corner, we have some key things to keep in mind. Some of them I'm going to say out loud to you, right? I've already told you about the materials, making sure you have them ready. The other important thing is that we're recording today's webinar for educational and marketing purposes. And also not to close out your browser at the end because we'll have a survey for you once the program's over. So get ready, sit tight, and we'll get started in a few minutes. All right. I did see someone write in the chat about that they thought that the cat was really cute, and I have to agree. I think it's a really adorable cat, and we'll have to tell you a little bit more about it as we get started. So it looks like we have a good number of people here, and so I think it'll be a good time for us to get started. So thanks for sharing that, and we'll move forward. So welcome to our Art and Me workshop today. From the Smithsonian, we have colleagues from the National Museum of Asian Art, the Freer and Sackler Galleries, as well as the Smithsonian American Art Museum's London Conservation Center. So we're going to do some quick introductions for today's program. We're going to be focusing on printmaking, and we'll give you some instructions on how to make it. But before we get started, my name is Matthew Lesnowski, and I'm an educator at the Smithsonian's Freer and Sackler Galleries. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Ellen.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ellen Chase, and I am an objects conservator. I work with Matthew, and I'll tell you a little bit more later about what a conservator is. But in the meantime, I'm going to let Leah introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming today. My name is Leah Bright, and I'm also an objects conservator, just like Ellen, but I work at the Smithsonian's American Art Museum. And I'll turn it over to Laura.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Laura Hoffman, and I work at the Smithsonian American Art Museum's London Conservation Center. Sometimes we say SAM for short because that can be a long thing to say. And I work with Leah, and I am the program manager of the Conservation Center.
And Ellen's going to take it from here.
Okay. So if any of you have come before, or maybe have heard this word before, does anybody know what a conservator is? Have you heard that word before? Do you have any ideas of what we might do? And you can take a look at the picture too. Maybe that might give you some ideas of what we might do in the museum.
Ellen, someone wrote microscope is what they see.
Right, that's right. So what you're seeing is a conservator looking through a microscope. So what we do as conservators is we take care of the art. And I see someone wrote in the chat, study pictures and bring art back to life. And yes, so we're kind of like doctors for art. So one of the things that we do is just like when you go to the doctor for a checkup, the doctor checks and makes sure and looks and sees how you're doing. And so what that conservator is doing, looking through the microscope, is examining that piece of artwork closely to make sure that everything's okay and see how things are going. And then just like a doctor would, sometimes if you're hurt, the doctor will help you. And so if artwork is hurt, we'll help it. And then, but also sometimes we do things to make sure that it doesn't get damaged in the first place. So it's called preventive. And so like Matthew said, we're looking through the microscope. We always look at things really closely. And then we'll talk about sort of some of the other things we do as we get into it more, but that's exactly what we do. You're right. So Laura, if you could go to the next slide, please. So the other thing we'll talk about a little bit more once you guys are doing your art projects is some of the tools that we use. But this is just a picture of what my desk looks like on a really busy day. You can see I have a lot of stuff going on my desk. And a couple of the other things I'll just talk about quickly. I don't know if you guys can see what I'm wearing. This is, I'm wearing a lab coat. So have any of you thought about, or can you think about reasons why I might be wearing a lab coat when I work with the artwork? Give it a second and think about it. And if you have any ideas, put it in the chat. Art is messy. Yes, that is exactly right. And so if you see, you can even see on my lab coat, I am kind of messy. So sometimes I need to use paints and I don't want to get it on my clothing. But also, if I'm wearing something like a really fuzzy sweater, I don't want little bits of my sweater to wind up on the artwork. So it's for that reason too. So to protect me, and it's also to protect the art. And so, like I said, we'll talk about tools a little bit more going forward, but let's move on to the next one. And so Laura's going to take it over from here.
All right, so if you haven't already, this is a really good time to gather your materials. This looks like a lot of art materials, but what you're going to be doing is we're doing printmaking today. We're looking at all about prints. So we've given you different options, and these are just suggestions. You don't need everything on here. So for example, for printmaking in general, we all need things. If we're going to do a print, we will need some ink or paint in order to make our print. We'll need something to put the ink onto our print. So if you have what's called a brayer, that's like a roller, or a foam brush works well. If you don't have those, any other sort of bigger brush will work just fine. And then it can get a little messy. So we recommend, especially if you're going to be rolling on the paint, you need a good surface to put it on. So you can use a baking sheet or a plate or whatever you think you'll have ready. So those are the basics for everyone. Then I'm going to show you two different types. I'm going to do a quick demonstration. So we have subtractive printing, which sounds like a lot, but we'll go into what that means. And if you decide to do that, you'll just need a sheet of foam, maybe like a styrofoam. I'll show you what I have. I use this, I got this from the grocery store. It's a grocery store tray, but you can also use any other sort of foam. Sometimes you can get at an art store just these flat pieces of foam that work really well. And then you'll need something to impress into. So you'll need something like a pencil. You could use a pen or a popsicle stick or a skewer. If you instead want to do additive printing, that means you'll need a flat surface. So again, like a piece of cardboard, or again, if you don't have that, you could use something like a baking sheet. And then you'll want things to add onto. So we suggested things like string or yarn or rubber bands or glue. Again, it's pretty open to what you have and want to use. And the last thing we'll show you, and this is like if we have time, is to create your own protective folder so you keep your prints safe. And so that's pretty much a better activity to do after the program. But again, if you work really quickly and want to create it during, the materials that you need are something to create the folder. So we suggest like a manila folder or a piece of poster board. You just want to make sure that when you fold it together, it's larger than the size of your print. Then if you want to make some handles, again, I'll show you that. You can use paper, or I like to use, if you have a paper grocery bag, you can just take off those handles. Those work really great. So then you might just need some string and scissors and tape for that. And then you get to decorate it on the outside, which is super fun. So as you guys are gathering, I will start to show you, again, we're going to do a quick demo of each, and then you'll have time to work on it while you get more inspiration hearing from both Ellen and Leah and seeing some examples from our museums. All right. So for subtractive printmaking, if we think of the word subtract, that typically means take away from. So we're removing a layer. So what I like to do is, if you don't have a flat piece of styrofoam, so you can see here that mine is got a curve, I'm going to flip it onto the back side. Alternatively, you could also cut this off so that it is a totally flat piece. But I'm going to use the back side because my piece of styrofoam is pretty sturdy. And what I like about it is it already has some things written on here that are impressed in, which I think is kind of fun, and I can work into my design. So we wanted a piece of styrofoam because we can easily carve into it. And again, that means subtracting, we're carving into. So again, you can use any, because styrofoam is very easy to press into, you can use any type of pencil. I'm using a conservation and printmaking tool. This is usually actually more printmakers, but it's called an owl. And it's spelled, I believe, A-W-L, owl. I always mess it up when I say it too quickly. And here you can just press into lines. You want to make sure the key is you want to press into it so you can feel it, but you don't want to press it all the way through, because then when you try and paint over it, the paint will get onto your surface. So you want to give a good amount of pressure. And again, this works well to work together with your adult, your grown-up, in case you need any help. So you can make, I'm making some lines here, if you can see, around the words here and the numbers. Just like that. So you can see, I'll keep going with it after, but that gives you a sense of what the subtractive is. Now, once you're done putting in your design here for the subtractive, what I would do is put on some ink or some paint over this surface. And then I would take my piece of paper and I would put it right on top and rub it in so that the ink and the paint transfers onto your piece of paper. So that's an example of subtractive. Do you guys have questions about this type of printmaking before I explain what additive printmaking is? And again, if you have questions as you're making, we'll be monitoring the chat and we can answer them throughout. Now, for additive printmaking, we are going to be adding things onto our surface. So before we were putting them in, but now we're going to build up on our surface. Oh, we had a good question. Do you only put paint in the ridges created by the styrofoam or dip the whole thing in paint? Dipping the whole thing in paint might get really messy. I would suggest taking some sort of roller or a paintbrush and painting the whole surface. You might want to just, in terms of just the ridges or the whole thing, I like to do the whole thing because you can see all the different depressions and you get to see the parts where you left with no carving. So I think it's a fun experiment. It's great to have multiple pieces of paper so you can see how it looks with different amounts of paint and different colors. So that's a really good question. Okay, so for additive printmaking is we're going to be adding onto the surface. So for example, I've got these really cool long rubber bands. So what I might do is add them here. I have a couple of them and just going to make a fun design this way. I'm just going to put it here so you can see I've put on a bunch of different rubber bands. So now I'm adding up the texture this way. If you feel it, you can feel the ridges are up as opposed to into the material. So then you can also use string and you could glue them on, or you could use any sort of materials you don't mind being on here. And you can do here, what you would do after this, once you have your design set, is you paint on top. Again, you would roll the paint on top of here, and then you would print. So you take your piece of paper, you have your, once you've painted this surface, you take your piece of paper, you put it on top. You really have to put some pressure and rub it down to make sure it gets all. And again, this activity works really well with your grown-up. And then you would reveal your print on the bottom here. People are saying they can't see my work. Would it be helpful for me to take it off for a second? I'll take this off for a second, the screen share. Okay. So here I can show you again. This is my example of, you can actually see the both examples here. I'll do this side as my additive print. You can see here I've added on all of these different rubber bands. So if I was printmaking on top of here, it's ridged up and you can feel it. So you can also use, you can glue on anything. So again, that's why I'd use a piece of cardboard, use something you don't mind gluing onto. But I like using the rubber bands because then you can easily remove them after, although they'll be covered in some paint. So then you add this on, you put this on, once you have the paint on, you rub, rub, rub. And again, I can't show you it because I'm holding it over my computer and I'm worried I get paint all over my computer, which wouldn't be the best. And then you would have your print. If you're doing subtractive, the first kind, I'll just remove these here. You can see I have all these. You're just carving lines and patterns and whatever your design is into. So you feel it, you can see it going into it. And then you do the same way where you would cover this in paint using a paintbrush or a foam roller or what's called a brayer. So that's the roller. And you put it on your paper. You rub, 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 and then you have your print. So those are two different types of prints. The other part that I wanted to show you is the kind of a post-program activity is after your prints are dry, you want to keep them safe. And so a really good way to do that is to have a folder that we mentioned. So here I have a manila folder. And what I did is I took these great handles I reused them from a grocery store bag, and I taped them on the outside. That's really important to put them on the outside. If you put them on the inside, you might harm your artwork because you want to keep your artwork safe inside. That's why you want to make sure you have a folder that is larger than your actual artwork. So if I've got my imaginary artwork in here, I can keep it nice and safe. There's plenty of space. And what's fun is when you don't have your artwork in, because that would be very bad practice, is you can decorate the outside so you can really make it your own. So you could put on crayons or markers or even more paint, and then it's your own personal protective folder for your prints. So this is a really good way. We'll explain why you want to keep your prints safe in just a moment. And after this, I think if there aren't any other questions about the activity, we'll turn, as you guys are working now, we'll go back into our slideshow and show you some examples of some prints at our museums and how the art doctors take care of them. Okay, let me share the screen back. Okay. Oh, and one other thing I just want to say, at the end of this program, we're going to offer a show and tell with your artwork if you'd like. So we're going to put in the chat box when you're ready, if you want to be a part of it, to email us a picture so we can pull it up on the screen and everyone can see your artwork. Okay.
Okay, so once everybody settles in and has their stuff and you're working on your projects, or actually if you want to watch and then do your project later, that's okay too. But Leah and I are just going to talk to you a little bit about some of the pieces in our collections. And so Laura just told you all about the different ways to make a print. And the prints we have in the museum, there are lots of different ways of making them, but a lot of them are made in the same way. And so these are some of the tools that we have in our collection that are used to make prints. They're part of a Japanese woodblock print tool set. And so if you look at it, some of the things are, you can see, you know how Laura was talking about carving things out for subtractive, and the tool on the very far left, that's a chisel, and that's used for wood, to carve out wood, to make a lot of Japanese prints are done using a block of wood. And so that's used to help carve out the wood. And then if you look in the center, just like she was talking about before, there's a brush to apply the ink or the paint. And then below is a dish with some green pigment in it that would have been used to put on the print. I'm sorry, on the block, not on the print. And then just like Laura was saying, you would have the block carved and you would put the ink on it, and then you would put a piece of paper down and then you would rub it. But in woodblock print, Japanese woodblock printmaking, they have a special tool called a baron, which you can see over on the side. And it's a really good way to rub really hard and get a good contact between the block and the paper so that you transfer everything. So just like what you're doing now, they're really similar tools, and they're made in a very similar way. Can you go to the next one, please, Laura? So in thinking about prints and how you're doing your design, take a look at these two. The darker one on the left, that is a printing plate. That's a copper printing plate. And then piece of paper on the right, that's a print from that same plate. So take a quick look and tell me if you see any, what do you see that's different about the design on the plate and on the paper, on the print? Do you see anything that looks different in terms of the design?
So one person said on the left, the paper looks more dark and maybe it looks older is what they thought, or that it's
Okay. Right. And so I see that Owen says there are trees on the left. So it's actually the one on the left it's not paper, it's a piece of metal. And so just like you guys are carving into the styrofoam or the cardboard, that's what this in this case it's using copper. And there are trees in both, but what happens if you look really closely, see how there's that big dark area that's the tunnel? If you look on one and you look on the other, it's actually on opposite sides, because when you make a print, you're actually flipping the image, you're reversing the image. So if you write something on your tray, if you have a letter or you put your name on it, when you print it, it's going to look backwards. So it's something to think about when you're making your design. And then can we go to the next one, please, Laura? And so this is an example. Remember I was showing you the tools earlier for Japanese woodblock prints? This is a Japanese woodblock print. And we're really lucky at our museum. We actually have some of the original printing blocks in addition to the prints. So this is an example here. You can see the wood on the left side, and that would have been carved with tools like the ones that I was showing you earlier. And then the ink would be put on it, and the raised parts are where the ink would go. So you can see the fish, right? And for these kind of prints, they're in different colors, right? So you can see how many different colors do you see on here? On the print on the right? Or tell me some of the colors you see.
blue is the
Blue,
first one that came up.
right, of course, yes. And red, yes, very good. And there's also red, blue, gray, black, right. So in woodblock printing of this type, each different color has its own block, right? So if you had 5 colors, you would have 5 different blocks. Sometimes there are things that are painted on by hand, but each time. So there are lots of different blocks that would be used to make this kind of print. And the part that you would want to be in that color is the part that would be raised, and you would carve away the other parts. So if you look at, oh, sorry, that's good. That's good. No, it's good. It's fine. So we also have more than one version or one example of this print. So take a moment, and when you're looking, look at the 2 different ones and tell me what you see that looks different. Do these 2 look exactly the same? They would have looked the same when they were first made, but what do you notice that's different now?
People are wondering if it's faded. The one on the right looks older.
Yes. So it does look faded, you're right. And it does look older. The colors are different, right? So if these originally did look the same, and it's not that the one on the right is older, it's just that it has been it's been more exposed. It's been out of its folder or out of a book, right? It hasn't been protected. So it's had a lot of light. And one of the things about a lot of the objects in our museum, not just prints, but especially prints, is that they're very sensitive. Light can cause them to fade and can cause a lot of damage. So we are very careful in the museum about protecting things from light, because you can see the difference. If something has been in the light and it's faded and it can't go back, we can't fix that. So once something fades, there's nothing we can do about it as conservators. And the other thing you'll notice about the one on the right is it looks kind of dark and grungy, doesn't it? It looks kind of dirty, right? Because when you handle paper, it's very easy to get the oils and dirts from your finger on to the paper. And so it winds up leaving grime behind. So again, that's another reason why it's really important. We're very careful about how we handle things. And a lot of the time we have prints in mats, so you don't have to touch them. And then also in folders like Laura was showing you, to protect them so we don't have to handle them and they're not exposed to light. And I think that we can go to the next one for now. And then Leah's going to tell you about this one.
All right, thanks, Ellen. So I'm going to show everybody some examples that use printmaking techniques in really unique and special and sometimes surprising ways that I hope will inspire you to really use your imagination when making your prints. So take a peek at this first one. It probably looks really different from what we've seen so far, but maybe if you can throw some words in the chat, what do you see? What is going on here? And maybe how is it different from the other artworks that we've seen so far? I'll give you a second to look. It's really cool. This is one of my favorites. Yes, bees. Good job. You're spot on. So this work is called Bee Pile, and it was made by the artist Sonia Romero in 2010. And she shows that you can use printmaking techniques to make artworks that are not only just on flat paper, but you can use prints to make sculptures and anything that you want, really. And so she used a wood block, like Ellen was talking about, to make these bees onto pieces of felt. And then she cut out the pieces of felt in the bee shapes and then hand stitched them together and then put them in this pile. And this artwork was actually originally, Laura, you can go to the next slide. And you can see it was originally displayed in a grocery store. And so she was using this artwork to try to tell the world about problems related to bee populations and how the populations are going down and how that's related to issues like climate change. So you could think about maybe an issue that's really important to you and how you could make that into a print. And I hope that you could also use this as inspiration to show you that you can make pretty much anything that your imagination can think up. And we can go to the next one. The photos are not great on this one, unfortunately, but this is another example of a print that is on something that's not paper, but this one is flat. And what do you think? Maybe the photo on the right, you can see it a little bit better, but can you tell what this print was made on? This one is actually made on something similar. Yes, someone said napkin, and it's something really similar. Yes, it was made on fabric. It's basically a cotton handkerchief or a paño. And it's a screen print, which is kind of a complicated, confusing way to make prints. But basically ink is pressed through a really fine screen with the areas where there's not ink is all blocked out. And this was made by the artist Shizu Saldamondo. And it's a portrait of a really famous musician in Los Angeles named Alice Bagg. So it's a portrait. And Laura, we can go to the next one. Maybe you can see a little bit better. Yes. So Shizu is a very talented portrait artist and creates a lot of portraits in print, but also in painting and with colored pencils of people in her life who were inspirational, her friends and family and musicians like Alice. So maybe think about people that inspire you or are important to you in your life, and you can make a print out of them. So although this print was made on fabric, it has a lot of the same issues conservation-wise that a print on paper might have. And it was brought to me in my lab to go to the art doctor because it was very wrinkly. You could probably see that in that other photo. So you might think, why not just iron it? You know, like a shirt at home, you could just iron it. But actually, for things ironing might be okay for our clothes at home, but for artworks in a museum, heat without any kind of moisture can actually really damage fabrics over time. And we want this artwork to last for many generations into the future. So I chose to just use tiny amounts of water to release those wrinkles from the fabric. And I didn't want to just dip it in water because the inks, I don't know if you've ever maybe like spilled a drink or something on a piece of paper, the inks can kind of go everywhere. And I really didn't want that to happen. So I used tiny bits of water really carefully in these special little packets all around the print, and then use weight to flatten and release those wrinkles. So I went little by little, very carefully to get the wrinkles out.
And so these here are the weights, right?
Yep, those are weights, yes. So as the water helps relax the fabric and take the wrinkles out, the weights help then to flatten it and make sure that it stays flat.
I would say don't try this at home. This sounds very complicated,
yes,
much more complicated than
really
a print.
Careful, particularly with things like the artist's signature was made in pen. So I was very nervous about introducing any water because that could just go away. And because this paño is so nice and white and clean, we have to be very careful when handling it in the museum. And we have to wear things like gloves to make sure that anything that's on our hands doesn't get on that nice white fabric.
And someone was curious how long it took to get the wrinkles out.
That's such a good question. I worked on this probably for probably about 6 hours, because I had to leave those little weighted packets one by one for probably about 45 minutes in each place. So it really didn't take that long, but then the time that I was actively working on it wasn't that long, but I just had to wait for long periods of time. Really good question. And here you can see a little bit better the artist's signature that is on the bottom of the print. And this last example is actually a digital print. So it was made totally on the computer, but it was designed by the artist Fabiana Rodriguez in 2018, and it's called Migration is Beautiful. And what do you see in this one? What colors do you see? What is that image in the middle? Take a good look. Sorry, I'm going kind of fast. I want to make sure we have plenty of time to see all of your artworks.
Someone said they see people in the wings.
Yes, good job. Good eye. I love this one because it's kind of simple, but it really is powerful and beautiful. So it shows that even though it may not have that much, it's still really gorgeous and beautiful. So this is showing, how prints are often made into posters to convey ideas, just like the bee pile at the beginning. So she designed it on the computer, so it doesn't quite have the same conservation issues like a paper print, but it could be viewed by anyone who has access to a computer. Yeah, so think about what ideas you might be inspired by and try to convey them in a print.
So we had talked a little bit about the idea of protecting prints and other kinds of artwork from light. And so it's not just when they're in storage and not on view. We also have to think about it when they're on exhibit. And so if you've ever been to the Freer Sackler, this is the Peacock Room. And the windows are not open very often, partly to protect the room from light. But some days it's open and you can come see it. And so what these people are doing, we have special film on the window to protect the light. There are certain kinds of light that are worse than others, and these films will reduce or make that kind of light. There will be less of that light, so it helps protect the room. And some of the other things we think about is how much light we have in the galleries, and we also have skylights, and so we have to think about making sure there's not too much of that either. And so we have special lighting designers who specifically think about how to light the artwork so that you can see it so it's really beautiful, but also making sure that they're protecting it and not using too much light so that it won't fade or have other problems like we were looking at earlier. And then if you can go to the next one. And this is just an example of the kinds of folders that we had been talking about that Laura showed you. And so it's a way that we keep a lot of our artwork either in the mat, which is cardboard on the right, or on the left, those are the folders like you can make for your own artwork, and it keeps it so it won't get torn, so it won't get dirty, and so it won't be exposed to light, and it'll help you keep your stuff safe. So this is some of the artwork that we made, just to give you examples. And you can see there are lots of different things that using the same kind of materials, you can come up with really different results, right? So it can be something where you have a specific drawing and it's just in one color, or it can be something where you have lots of different colors and maybe not maybe shapes as opposed to a specific thing. So it's just a way to show you how many different things you can do just by using the same materials. So one thing, like we were talking about earlier, as art conservators, as art doctors, we always examine things and we want to look at them closely to understand what's happening and their condition. And we always write down what we notice so that when we look at them later, we know what it looked like earlier. So it's a way to really help us understand what we're seeing. So this is something, we'll do this now. If you guys have your artwork ready, you can do it with your artwork. Or if you would rather do it along with me, I would love some help writing this examination report for the print here. So, so let's take a look together, and we'll start with the report. So the first thing on a report is we always put our name, so that if anybody ever has any questions about what's written, they know who to ask about it, right? So my name is Ellen. So for me, I would write Ellen where it says conservator's name. And then for Art's name, Art doesn't always have a name, but it's really helpful to describe something. So, so sometimes in the museum, we actually have numbers as a way to keep track of things, but then we also give things names. So I think maybe here I'm going to call it colorful shapes. That's going to be my name for this. And then so for the examination, we look at things closely and we write down what we notice. So can you guys help me take a look and think about different words that we'd use? So in this form, it says, what 3 words best describe your artwork? So let's see, help me come up with some ideas. What are some ways to describe this print that you're looking at on the screen right now? Is it dark? Is it light? What colors do you see? Can you describe what's in the image? Tell me some things that you see.
Purple, red, orange, Amber and Owen shared.
Right, exactly. So there are lots of different colors on this one.
And then someone else said triangle.
Yes, I agree. Yes, that is something that you notice a lot, right? And then I might even say something like the paper is white, right? And if you look really closely, you notice there's kind of a bumpy texture to the paper. That's kind of something helpful to know too. So all of those things would be the kind of things that you could write down when you're examining a print. And then the next thing is describe how you felt making the art. And so I have to admit that I did not make this, Leah made it. So, but I am willing to bet that Leah felt pretty happy when she made this print, because it's a very happy print. And then the last thing on the report is, what can you do to take care of your art? So I know we've been talking about some things that you could do to take care of your art. So does anybody remember what any of those things are that you could do to help keep this print safe, or your print safe?
Oh, someone said put it in a folder.
Exactly. Nicely done. And then the last thing on the form is you have an opportunity to draw your artwork, because that also sometimes it's really helpful. If you have a drawing or a photograph, you can point to specific things when you're talking about them in your examination.
All right, so I think we said a bunch of times that if you want, we're going to be moving into the show and tell portion. So please email us. I have a bunch already coming up, so I'm queuing them up right now. So email them to me at dwrclunder@si.edu. And we'll also be putting these in our learning lab that we'll share out with you afterwards. Also, as a quick follow-up, after you've done your prints and after this program, take a look around your home and your community, see if you notice any prints around, and if so, where are they stored, how are they displayed? So just think a little bit as if you were an art doctor or conservator.